The demolition crew was supposed to start Monday morning. The old Westinghouse research facility in Monroeville had been abandoned since the early 2000s, and the city finally approved the teardown to make way for a shopping complex. I was there as a safety inspector, making sure they'd properly cleared any hazardous materials before the wrecking balls arrived. That's when we found the sealed laboratory in Sublevel 2. The building blueprints from 1985 showed it as Storage Room C-17, but when our team cut through the steel door, welded shut from the inside, we discovered something that made no sense. The room was pristine, not a speck of dust. The air inside was stale but breathable, like it had been hermetically sealed for decades. And the equipment inside was still running. 3 banks of computers, their green monitors flickering with scrolling data, radiation detectors clicking steadily in the background. And in the center of the room, a lead-lined chamber about the size of a phone booth, its heavy door standing open. Empty. The power company confirmed what we already suspected. This room had been drawing electricity continuously since 1987. 34 years of utility bills automatically deducted from an account that still had funds. The nameplate beside the door read, Dr. Marcus Holloway, Nuclear Engineering Division. I'd heard that name before. Every safety inspector in western Pennsylvania knew the Holloway case. The nuclear engineer who walked into work one September morning in 1987 and was never seen again. The FBI investigation that went nowhere. The sealed files that stayed sealed. But I'd never heard about this laboratory. The next morning I made some calls. Started with the personnel records from the old Westinghouse Nuclear Division. Found someone willing to talk, Janet Morrison, who'd been Dr. Holloway's research assistant back in '87. She agreed to meet me at a diner in Irwin, about 20 minutes from the old facility. Janet was 73 now, retired from a long career in medical physics. Her hand shook slightly as she stirred her coffee, but her memory was sharp. Marcus was brilliant, she said. Ph.D. from Carnegie Mellon, specialization in reactor safety systems. He'd been with Westinghouse for 12 years when he disappeared. I showed her photos from the sealed laboratory. Her face went white. I've never seen this room before, she whispered. This wasn't part of our research area. We worked up on level 3 in the main lab, but Marcus... She paused, studying the pictures more carefully. He'd been staying late a lot that last month. Said he was working on something important, something that could change how we think about containment. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notebook. He gave me this the day before he disappeared. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe. I never knew what to do with it, so I just kept it. The notebook was filled with Marcus Holloway's handwriting. Technical diagrams, equations, and scattered phrases that made my skin crawl. Isolation protocol successful, 72 hours continuous. Subject remains stable at -40 degrees Celsius core temp. Behavioral patterns suggest awareness despite absence of neural activity. Must maintain containment, disposal not an option. The final entry was dated September 23, 1987. It's getting stronger. Chamber seals holding, but I can feel it testing the boundaries. If I don't make it out, do not open the containment. Whatever happens, keep it isolated. Some things are meant to stay buried. I looked up at Janet. What was he working on? Officially, reactor waste containment systems. But those notes, she shook her head, that's not reactor waste. That's something else entirely. That afternoon, I went back to the sealed laboratory. This time, I wasn't there as an inspector. I was there because Marcus Holloway had left something behind, and after 34 years, it was still waiting. The lead-lined chamber in the center of the room was more sophisticated than I had initially realized. Multiple layers of shielding, each with its own monitoring system. temperature gauges, radiation detectors, atmospheric sensors. All of them were active, all of them showing normal readings. Except for one. A motion sensor inside the chamber was registering intermittent activity. Small movements, irregular patterns. But the chamber was empty. I could see straight through the open door to the back wall. I found the control panel for the chamber systems. A logbook sat beside it, sealed in plastic. Marcus Holloway's final work notes. The logbook was methodical, clinical. Marcus Holloway documented everything like the scientist he was. But as I read through his final entries, I could feel his growing desperation bleeding through the technical language. September 15, 1987. Received the samples from 3 Mile Island cleanup crew today. Officially, we're testing new containment protocols for low-level contaminated materials. Unofficially, there's something in batch TMI 4471 that doesn't match any known isotope signature. Jenkins from Health Physics is asking too many questions. Move to sub-level lab to avoid scrutiny. 3 Mile Island, the nuclear accident from 1979. I remembered the stories. Partial meltdown, radioactive releases, thousands evacuated. But by 1987, the cleanup was supposed to be routine. September 17, 1987. Third day of isolation testing on TMI 4471. Standard procedure is 24-hour observation, but this material, it's not behaving like reactor waste. Temperature fluctuations despite consistent environmental controls. Geiger readings are erratic, sometimes normal background, sometimes spiking to dangerous levels with no apparent trigger. Janet thinks I'm working too many late shifts. Maybe I am. September 19, 1987. Something is definitely wrong with TMI 4471. The containment chamber is maintaining proper seals, but I'm detecting trace atmospheric changes in the lab. Faint chemical odor, almost metallic. Had building maintenance check the ventilation system twice, they found nothing. Beginning to suspect the material is more volatile than originally classified. I flipped ahead, looking for the entries Janet had referenced. Found them near the end. September 22, 1987. 72 hours of continuous monitoring. The material in TMI 4471 is not nuclear waste. I don't know what it is, but every test I run contradicts the previous one. Mass spectrometry shows organic compounds that shouldn't exist in irradiated materials. Electron microscopy reveals structures that appear almost organized, cellular, but not biological. I need to call Jenkins, need to report this, but who would believe it? Called home, told Martha I'd be working late again. She didn't say anything, but I could hear the disappointment. 23 years of marriage, and I'm spending our anniversary alone in a basement laboratory staring at something that might not even be from 3 Mile Island. September 23, 1987, 6:42 a.m. Didn't sleep last night, couldn't leave the lab. The material, I swear it's responding to observation. When I'm not looking directly at the chamber, the readings stabilize. But the moment I focus on it, everything spikes. Radiation, temperature, electromagnetic fields. It's like it knows I'm watching it. This is impossible. Materials don't have awareness. But I've run every diagnostic test we have, calibrated every instrument twice. The patterns are consistent. When I step away from the viewing window, everything normalizes within minutes. When I return, the activity resumes. September 23, 1987, 2:15 p.m. Called in sick to avoid the afternoon staff meeting. Can't leave this unsupervised. Janet brought me coffee and a sandwich around noon. She's worried, keeps asking if I'm feeling all right. Truth is, I don't know anymore. Been down here for 3 days straight, starting to question my own observations. But the data doesn't lie. The material is reacting to human presence. Not just mine. I had Janet stand by the chamber for 10 minutes while I monitored from the control room. Same spike patterns, same electromagnetic anomalies. Whatever TMI 4471 actually is, it's not passive. September 23, 1987, 11:30 p.m. Final entry. Something happened around 9 p.m. that I can't explain and won't put in the official logs. The containment chamber door was open when I returned for dinner. I know I sealed it, double-checked the pressure locks, verified the system status, but it was standing open. The material was gone. Searched every inch of the laboratory. No radiation traces, no residue, no sign that TMI 4471 ever existed. But the chamber's internal cameras were still recording. Reviewed the footage from 8:47 p.m. to 9:15 p.m. 28 minutes of empty chamber, door sealed. Then, at 9:15, the door simply opens. No one on camera, no mechanical failure, no system alert. I'm sealing this laboratory from the inside. Whatever was in that container, it's still here. I can feel it watching me, waiting. The air temperature drops whenever I approach the chamber area. The Geiger counter clicks intermittently, but never in the same location twice. If someone finds this logbook, do not attempt to remove anything from this room. Contact the Nuclear Regulatory Commission immediately. Tell them Marcus Holloway found something at 3 Mile Island that wasn't supposed to exist. Tell them it got out of containment and now it won't leave. I'm going to stay here until I figure out what to do next. Martha will be worried, but I can't go home with this thing following me. Some containment failures you can't clean up. Some things you just have to bury. The final page was torn, as if Marcus had ripped out whatever he wrote next. I looked around the laboratory with new understanding. The pristine condition, the sealed door welded from the inside, the equipment that had been running for 34 years. Marcus Holloway hadn't disappeared. He'd locked himself in, and he'd never come out. The motion sensor was still registering intermittent activity in the empty chamber. The next morning, I drove to Middletown, Pennsylvania. 3 Mile Island sits in the Susquehanna River like a concrete monument to nuclear anxiety. The cleanup from the 1979 accident had taken 14 years and cost over $1 billion. But according to Marcus's logbook, they were still moving contaminated materials in 1987. I needed to verify if batch TMI 4471 ever existed. The current plant manager, David Chen, met me in the visitor center. He was professional but cautious when I mentioned the Westinghouse connection. We did contract with several research facilities during the cleanup phase, he confirmed. Westinghouse, Bechtel, a few others, mostly for testing containment procedures and waste processing methods. What about specific material samples? Would you have records of batch numbers? Chen pulled up shipping manifests on his computer. September 1987. Here, 3 shipments to Westinghouse Nuclear Division that month. Standard low-level contaminated debris, concrete fragments, metal samples, soil, all properly documented and tracked. Any record of batch TMI 4471? He scrolled through the data. No. Our batch numbering system uses a different format. TMI 4471 isn't one of ours. I showed him Marcus's logbook entries. Chen read them carefully, his expression growing more concerned. This doesn't match our protocols, he said. We never shipped unidentified materials to outside labs. Everything was pre-analyzed and categorized before transport. And this description, organic compounds in irradiated materials, that's not consistent with reactor debris. Could something have been mislabeled, sent to Westinghouse by mistake? Unlikely, but he hesitated. There were some unusual findings during the cleanup phase. things we couldn't easily categorize. Most got stored in long-term containment rather than sent for research. What kind of unusual findings? Biological materials that had been exposed to extreme radiation but hadn't degraded the way they should have. Plant matter, organic compounds. The prevailing theory was that the high radiation levels had somehow preserved them, maybe even altered their molecular structure. He pulled up another file. Actually, there is one record from September 1987 that might interest you. A shipment that was returned to us by Westinghouse, listed as undeliverable, recipient facility sealed, pending investigation. The return date was September 24, 1987, one day after Marcus's final logbook entry. I drove back to Monroeville with more questions than answers. If TMI 4471 wasn't from 3 Mile Island, where it had come from, and why had Marcus been so convinced it was dangerous? That evening, I called Janet Morrison again. This time, I asked her about Marcus's mental state in those final weeks. He'd been under a lot of pressure, she admitted. The nuclear industry was changing after Chernobyl. More oversight, stricter safety protocols. Marcus took it personally. He felt like he was being questioned on everything he'd spent his career building. Was he sleeping, eating regularly? No, and that was unusual for him. Marcus was methodical about everything, his work schedule, his meals, his exercise routine. But that last month, he was staying in the lab 16, 18 hours a day. His wife Martha called me twice, worried about him. Did you ever see the material he was testing? Janet was quiet for a long moment. Once, he showed me the container when it first arrived. It was just a standard sample vial, maybe 2 inches tall, clear glass with a metal cap. But the contents? She paused. I'd never seen anything like it. Can you describe it? It wasn't solid, wasn't liquid, almost like a thick gel, dark gray, with these tiny flecks that seemed to move on their own. Marcus said it was probably just Brownian motion, microscopic particles suspended in solution. But it didn't look random. It looked purposeful. Did you think it was dangerous? At the time, no. We dealt with radioactive materials every day. But Marcus became obsessed with it. He'd sit and stare at that sample for hours, taking notes, running tests. I started to worry that the isolation was affecting his judgment. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen staring at copies of Marcus's logbook entries. The handwriting deteriorated as the days progressed. September 15th was neat, clinical. By September 23rd, the letters were shaky, erratic, the writing of someone who hadn't slept in days. But there was something else, something I'd missed on my first reading. Marcus had documented everything: temperatures, radiation readings, atmospheric conditions, but he'd never once described the physical appearance of TMI 4471. For a scientist who cataloged every detail, that omission felt significant. I went back to the sealed laboratory the next morning. This time, I brought proper radiation detection equipment and a thermal camera. If Marcus had been hallucinating from exhaustion, the evidence would be in the environmental data. The chamber was exactly as I had left it, empty, pristine, with that persistent motion sensor activity. But when I aimed the thermal camera at the interior, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a heat signature inside the chamber, faint but consistent with human body temperature, about the size of a person crouched in the corner. But the chamber was empty. I could see straight through it. The thermal reading was wrong. Had to be. Equipment malfunction. Ambient heat reflection. Something rational. But as I adjusted the camera settings, trying to eliminate the false reading, the heat signature moved. It shifted from the corner to the center of the chamber, then back again. Slow, deliberate movement. I lowered the camera and looked with my naked eye. Nothing. Just empty space and metal walls. I raised the camera again. The heat signature was still there, now positioned directly in front of the chamber's viewing window, as if it was looking back at me. I spent 3 days running diagnostics on the thermal camera, calibrated it against known heat sources, tested it in different environments, even borrowed a second unit from another inspection company. The readings were consistent across all equipment. There was something in that chamber registering human body temperature, but I was looking at empty space. On Thursday morning, I decided to search the rest of Sublevel 2. If Marcus had sealed himself in that laboratory, there had to be more evidence of what happened in those final days. I found it in a utility closet 30 feet down the corridor, behind a stack of old equipment manuals wrapped in plastic sheeting, Marcus Holloway's personal effects, his wallet, his wedding ring, his Westinghouse security badge, and a final letter addressed to his wife, Martha. My dearest Martha, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not dead, please understand that, but gone in a way that makes it impossible for me to come home. I need you to know that what's happening to me isn't your fault, isn't anyone's fault. I've spent my career studying containment, learning how to isolate dangerous materials. I never thought I'd become something that needed to be contained. The material from 3 Mile Island changed me. Not physically. The medical tests would show nothing wrong. But something happened during those 72 hours of observation. I started seeing things that weren't there, feeling temperatures that didn't exist, hearing sounds that had no source. By the 3rd day, I realized the truth. The problem wasn't with the material. The problem was with me. I've been awake for 96 hours. I know that. I've documented every moment, every hallucination, every impossible reading on instruments that I know are functioning perfectly. The chamber isn't registering motion because something is inside it. It's registering motion because I believe something is inside it, and my belief is so complete that it's affecting my observations. The human mind under extreme stress can create remarkably convincing false realities. I've read the studies on sleep deprivation, isolation psychosis, obsessive-compulsive behaviors in laboratory settings. I know what's happening to me, but knowing doesn't make it stop. I can't leave this laboratory because I can't trust my own perceptions anymore. If I go home, if I go anywhere, I'll bring this delusion with me. I'll see threats that don't exist, dangers that aren't real. I'll become a danger to you, to myself, to anyone around me. The kindest thing I can do is stay here until I figure out how to fix this, or until someone finds me and does what needs to be done. I love you more than my own sanity. That's why I'm choosing to protect you from it. Marcus. P.S. I've sealed the laboratory from the inside. The welding equipment was in the maintenance shop. It took me 6 hours, but the door is now permanently closed. If anyone finds this letter, do not try to open that room. Not because there's anything dangerous inside, but because there's someone inside who can no longer distinguish between what's real and what isn't. I sat in the utility closet, reading Marcus's letter 3 times. The handwriting was steady, lucid. This wasn't the scrawled desperation of his final logbook entries. This was the careful, methodical thinking of a scientist who understood exactly what was happening to him. Marcus Holloway hadn't been killed by mysterious materials from 3 Mile Island. He'd been killed by 3 days without sleep, by isolation, by the gradual erosion of his ability to trust his own senses. And he'd known it was happening. The thermal signatures I'd been detecting weren't evidence of anything supernatural. They were evidence that the same isolation that had broken Marcus was starting to affect me. I'd been spending hours alone in that sealed laboratory, staring at empty chambers, reading the desperate notes of a man who'd lost his grip on reality. I was beginning to see what he'd seen. I called Janet Mawson one final time. "Did you ever find Marcus?" she asked. "After all these years, did you finally find out what happened to him?" "I think I did," I said. "But I need to ask you something. That sample he showed you, TMI 4471, you said it looked like it was moving?" "Yes, but was Marcus in the room when you observed it?" Janet paused. "Yes, he was standing right beside me, pointing out the movement patterns." "And you saw what he described?" Another pause, longer this time. "You know, I'm not sure I would have noticed anything unusual if Marcus hadn't pointed it out, but once he explained what to look for, I could see it too." The power of suggestion. A brilliant scientist, exhausted and isolated, convincing himself that a perfectly normal sample was behaving abnormally, and then convincing others to see the same impossibilities. I hung up and drove back to the Westinghouse facility one last time. I needed to see that chamber again, but this time with the knowledge of what Marcus really was fighting. The motion sensor was still active, still registering intermittent movement in the empty space. But now I understood what it was detecting. Marcus Holloway was still in that chamber. Not as a ghost, not as some supernatural presence. He was there as the final remains of a brilliant mind that had broken under the weight of isolation and obsession. His body had died decades ago, probably from dehydration or exhaustion in those first weeks after sealing himself in. But his delusions had become so powerful, so completely internalized, that they'd outlasted him. The equipment he'd left running for 34 years wasn't monitoring some mysterious material. It was monitoring the echo of his madness, the persistent belief that something needed to be contained. And anyone who spent enough time in that room, reading his notes, trying to understand his work, would eventually start to see what he'd seen. The motion sensors weren't malfunctioning. They were working exactly as designed, detecting movement where Marcus Holloway's broken mind insisted movement existed. I sealed the laboratory access and filed my final report with the city planning office. My recommendation was simple. Do not demolish sub-level 2, seal it permanently, and build around it. Some containment failures aren't about dangerous materials. They're about dangerous ideas. And some ideas are so powerful, so completely believed, that they can outlive the minds that created them. The demolition was postponed indefinitely. The shopping complex was built on the upper levels, and sub-level 2 remained sealed beneath 60 tons of concrete. Sometimes I drive past the site and wonder if those motion sensors are still registering activity in an empty chamber. but I never go back inside. Because now I understand what Marcus Holloway learned in those final days. The most dangerous thing you can contain isn't radioactive material. It's the human capacity to believe so completely in something that it becomes real, even when you know it isn't. And that kind of contamination never decays.